Morning, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in and following, sharing. This morning, this is part two with my niece Gatica, and we're going to be talking for sure about Tlingit language revitalization, but who knows what we'll talk about because this is a brave Indigenous conversation. And I always start out by reading this piece of writing I found, so I'm going to do that now. An invitation to a brave space. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not it will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. That was written by Mickey Scott B. Jones, who is a Black woman who started um, some. Oh, I'm getting mixed up. She didn't start anything. I don't know. I just did a little research on her, and she's no longer with us. She's in the spirit world. And I was just thinking, I actually came to that piece of writing through work that you had brought to the community. So thanks for that. I love it. All right. So for people who didn't listen to episode one, I thought maybe you could introduce yourself again and then sort of maybe recap. I don't know. Whatever. Let's see what happens. All right. Over to you.
Right. Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, so my name is Gatica Jack, and I live on the territory of my people, the Taku River Tlingit, and I do work in language revitalization predominantly with an amazing team of folks. Children of the Taku Society is the organization that we do that work through. And yeah, we also do other things, which is a part of where that poem kind of came into our lives. And I was feeling kind of pulled to talk about that work a little bit today, actually. So maybe we could chat about that. Very appropriate for a brave Indigenous space. But yeah, I mean, most of my last maybe 15 years of my life has been really dedicated to the revitalization of Tlingit ways of being and specific to Taku River Tlingit people. And so being here and being on this land, raising my children in the language, living a land-based lifestyle, and all things that fit in those categories are what I've committed my life to. And really early on, it was obvious and apparent that I needed to bring other people with me. Otherwise, what's the point? And so now we have an organization and we have many programs and we teach classes and all those things. So,
Before
yeah.
you go on, yeah, before you go on, I just had a memory that like before I came to your territory, I had never heard of Tlingit people, and
Mm.
I was like, Tlingit, like it was like I met this one house when I was trying to tell her my husband was Tlingit, your uncle. She listened to me and she was repeating it over, Tlingit, Tlingit. Are you sure he's not Cree? She said. So she just had no perspective that there was anyone else in the world except Cree people. But people don't know. Not everyone knows who the Tlingit are. So can you please describe for everyone listening who the Tlingit are or
Yeah,
where they're located on the globe?
for sure. We're very far north. I feel like I'm going to do a poor colonial description of this because I tend to not acknowledge actually like Canada and like all of the division of the provinces, right?
So known
But
as
yeah, all the weird divisions. So I will do the best job that I can within that context. Um, yeah, we're very far north. We have uh, 3 sister communities that share territories. And we also have territory along the coast. And so um, I think that for us, we are in the most beautiful of the Tlingit communities. I'm probably biased in thinking that, but yeah, we get the best of both worlds. We have, you know, in our territory, we have temperate rainforests and things that are very coastal, and we have like boreal forests that are very much drier and have all of the coniferous trees. And so, um, and we have just like gorgeous, beautiful water systems and clean water, many mountains, high mountains. Uh, yeah, amazing air, and most of our territory is very undeveloped. The community that we exist in and share with others is about 300 people. And so in total, including Tlingits and non-Tlingit people. And so, yeah.
I'll do the
Anything
colonial
else?
version. Okay, I'll do the colonial version. So, to help people locate themselves, I always say, because people don't know where Atlin, BC is, I always say we shop out of Whitehorse, Yukon. And they're like, oh, okay. That's, like people know generally where Whitehorse is. And so we're in the very top northwestern corner of what is also known as British Columbia. And Atlin, I always tell people, is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. So there is only a road into Atlin, and the road stops at Atlin. So you have to come on the Alaska Highway and then drop down into Atlin about an hour down the highway. Then you come to the end of the road. And I also tell people that living in your country for 31 years now, 32 years, that it's kind of like living at the end of a wool sock in the toe thing. We're cozy at the end of the sock there, and it's warm and lovely, and sometimes stinky, but that's okay. So,
That's
all right. So, just for listeners, I wanted to place us on the globe in the world. What did you want to talk about this morning then?
Oh, I feel quite open. I mean, I would love if we could chat about some of the work that we did together or some of the work that we do together in general. But if you wanted to talk about language work, I feel quite open.
Well, how about if we start with you sharing some of the other work that Children of the Taku Society does? COTS is the acronym, and people can find your website.
Mhm.
So, what other kind of work does COTS do?
So, yeah, for those who didn't listen to part one, I guess I would just say that the majority of the work we do is creating really effective language curriculum within a fluency transfer system. And so we're probably in the mid to late stages of completing a number of 6 textbooks that are intended to bring you all the way from zero speaking ability to advanced fluency level through a methodology that is very unique and is extremely applicable and particularly useful for small Indigenous communities that are experiencing high levels of language extinction. And so, for our community and for the Tack River Tlingit dialect, we were at a state of extinction when I had started doing this work. The Tlingit language wasn't in a state of extinction, but our dialect in Allen, we didn't have any burst speakers that were left alive. And so that were still living. And so we started from that place in this community where there was no programming and we didn't have any burst speakers who were able to work with us. And so we really needed to focus in on a methodology that was going to work for that level of language disruption. And so
Mm.
this language methodology that we work with, that was created by the Sailor School of Spokane, has been very successful. And they were at a very similar stage of language disruption. And I think that that was really, really important. It was just for us quite lucky that we stumbled upon it, but it was a very important starting point that I didn't realize was actually that essential. And so that's
Mm,
the majority of work that where we're putting like, I would say 70 to 80% of our resources are going towards curriculum development because developing advanced textbooks in the Tlingit language is just like an immense feat. These are like going to be like $1 million textbooks, you know, by the end. So valuable. But some of the other work that we do, and I mean, we run programs as well. So we teach through the curriculum. We have pilot cohorts, and there are other language cohorts that are coming up after us. My auntie Joan was a part of one of those cohorts. Love to hear your perspective being a student in one of those, actually, because I think that we didn't get to hear that a lot last time.
mm,
But what we are also doing is accompanying programming that is either needed and necessary for the language revitalization movement that needs to happen and needs to be supported. Um, there's work that can make that easier for
mm,
those of us who are in the thick of it and in the trenches of it.
mm,
So we have done, I think the most recent work that we have done was seemed very different than language work, but actually was accompanying and necessary, was to create uh, a path forward in how to build restorative systems. And so we started to explore, because there's such a high level of trauma around language loss,
yeah.
we were experiencing as students and as teachers and as new learners, there's just a high level of language violence that's happening in the language revitalization landscape of Tlingit, of all languages, I think, in varying levels, but definitely we were seeing, witnessing, experiencing that. And I think that there is, it's quite common in our communities for that to be normal, those to be normal interactions, for that to be normal behavior, where there's like high levels of violence. But in particular, around the revitalization of our ways of being, that healing that is happening around the trauma that people are then getting in contact with by participating in the revitalization of their people's ways of being,
Mm,
um, that slows down or has the potential to slow down this really important revitalization work where time is of the essence. And so
mm,
we really started to put our thoughts towards, okay, well, how could we support this? How could we support people to be a part of um, programs that have compassionate accountability built into them? And
mm,
what would that look like? And so we started to explore different methodologies. We have really entered into just the beginning stages of another stream of revitalization work, which is moving into peacemaking processes. And what we came up with, which really we're in the beginning stages of piloting, is a um, is a path forward for people in document form so that it can be quite accessible
mm,
for them to develop their own systems for restorative practices within whatever context they may be operating from. And
mm,
so if you can do it in a family group, in theory, of course, we're piloting this, but you should be able to do it in a family group. We are going to be implementing and creating a restorative system for children of the Taku Society. You can create temporary agreements in classrooms. You can ideally implement it in community-based programs, and community engagement, I think in particular, really needs this. And so there are a bunch of methodologies that are have been around for a long time, and there were a lot of contributors to who have dedicated their lives to really learning and teaching within these different methodologies. One of them was nonviolent communication, one of them was deep democracy, and we ended up inviting in a number of teachers to help us to facilitate programs in the community, and to help us to begin learning what would this look like, and could it be applicable to what we're experiencing in our communities. That really is creating a lot of disconnection. I think the experiences that people are having, and the triggered trauma responses that they may be having, um, are creating divisions even amongst those who are in the closest attachment relationships. We're
Yeah.
witnessing this happening in families. We're witnessing this happening in work environments. We're witnessing this happening. In particular, there are like long-standing grudges and conflicts that just like never end for lifetimes. It was so interesting, Auntie. I was talking to interviewing someone recently, and they were mentioning, just kind of like as an interesting part of our interview, that it was, oh no. See, I hate repeating stories where I didn't memorize the facts, but there was just so much information
No.
coming at me. I think it was Uncle Leo, maybe, who went all the way up Monarch, and he found two bull moose who had their horns stuck
Wow.
together
Wow.
in conflict, and all he found of them were their skeletons. And their horns had gotten locked together, and they died that way.
Oh my
And
God.
I am dying to go and find that photo so I can include it in our document, because I was like, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
People are dying in their conflicts, still locked in them. Like, you're gonna be carrying that forward to your
Mm.
lifetime, but I just wanted to share that with you, because you were such an important and contributing participant in all the workshops that we held for community, in a pilot form. And so, really genuinely interested to hear what your experiences were, and as a participant, and also as someone who's been like living in this community like as long as I've been alive.
Wow, you're so amazing. Just gets hooks me right in there. That was such a powerful image and truth, eh? That those moose were locked in battle and could not let go and died that way. How many
Oh
of
my
us
God.
in our communities are going to die locked in conflict with people we love? Actually, with
Mm,
people we love. And that's
mm,
that's the saddest part, is that it's not conflict with strangers, you know? I
yeah.
mean, for sure, we're gonna be locked in conflict with the Canadian state and die probably in that form, but, that's to be expected. Give me my land back and I'll let go, you know? But, yeah, wow, that was really powerful imagery. I hope you do find the picture. Before I
Mhm,
share, you said several things, that were so interesting and powerful. I was thinking even the whole idea of having a trauma response, as a general comment, I first heard that in 2019. I had never heard that word. That's a new idea in our communities, that we're having trauma responses. Prior to 2019, I'd not heard that. And I was on the motorcycle run that time, and I was in a conflict with someone, and a person in the city we'd stopped in said, "Joan, that she's just having a trauma response to you." And I was like, "Oh, okay, but it sounds like she's just really pissed off. I don't know what you mean by trauma response." And so
right.
these are generally all new ideas that are coming into our spaces. which is not a bad thing. So I just want to comment on that. I think if
Auntie, I
what
didn't realize it was that new. I'm shocked.
yeah,
I had
I
no idea.
never heard that before 2019. And of
Yeah,
course,
and you're a very educated person. You stay up on the know, so
I
I'm
try.
surprised.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, but tell me about it later after I get out of the." I thought I was going to get punched in the face. Um, so you mentioned like fluency transfer systems. If we do get back to it, I think it'll be good to distinguish between a system that is actually a fluency transfer system in language or not. I just want to flag that.
Mhm,
Language violence. Today is the first time I've heard what we live described that way. Like, for
mhm,
sure, we lived language violence in residential school, day school, and we live language violence. I mean, there's many ways I can think of it, how we live it in the mainstream, like in Manitoba, for example. Um, it's even language violence in terms of us not being seen. um, the province Manitoba is from an Ojibwe word Manitopi, you know, and it's sourced in that. Um, Winnipeg, Winnipi, is another Ojibwe word. There's so many of our words from our languages that have become a part of the Canadian state, and the source is we are not acknowledged as the source. And I
mm,
experience that as violent, because
mhm,
I'm rubbed out, you know? Um, so and then of course there's language violence. I was at an event yesterday where people were sharing, a couple of participants were sharing how, they were removed from their homes at a young age for whatever reasons, the colonial trauma and all of that. And when they come home, they're trying to relearn their language, and they're, instead of being welcomed and encouraged and taught, they're shunned and shamed and ridiculed. And so
mhm,
we've all become, so being, in true Joan form, Auntie Joan form, I was the facilitator, and I said, well, I think what's happening there is that, in part, a lot of our people who are still language speakers don't realize that they've been impacted by their experience at residential school, and their only way to be is like a mean nun or priest or brother. So they
mm,
act like that, and they're elders now. Not all of them, of course, but there's a lot of cultural superiority around
mm,
language, where
mhm,
fluent speakers generally always start by saying, I have retained my language. I went to residential school and I didn't lose my language. And every time I hear someone say that, I'm happy they didn't. But I think to
mm,
myself, oh my God, I feel so bad for everybody that did go and lost their language that's in the room.
mm,
Like, how are
right.
they feeling? Like, they're
Mhm,
for sure feeling less, they're feeling less than and stupid, and what was wrong with them. And so I think this is all core to the programming that you've brought to our community. I loved when you said compassionate accountability. Oh my God,
mm,
I need to really, I think I'm pretty good at that, but I know I have a framework in those words, that what I'm shooting for, like what I want in our communities, is compassionate accountability. Yeah, I love that.
mhm,
Love that.
mhm,
And of course, peacemaking processes. You've known me your whole life, and my main thing is that until we learn to resolve conflict between each other personally, we're not going anywhere, as
mm,
Indigenous people. Like, we have uh, at the personal level, at the community level, at the national level, as nations, like, we need to restore our own justice processes so that we have a way. I also heard over this week about following the MMIW Justice in the Inquiry recommendations, that after almost 5 years, only 2 of the 231 recommendations have been implemented in 5 years. What do we
Oh my
do?
god.
What do we do? Tell us what to do. Tell us what to do. Here, do these 231 things. Okay, we'll do 2.
Right.
Jeez, you gotta laugh. Otherwise, you jump off a bridge. Anyways, I digress. What the hell was I saying? I was talking about, oh, forget it. It went away. I got off on a sidetrack. And then you were asking me my experience in the language programming that COTS is providing and sharing. It's so amazing.
Well,
Oh, go
Auntie,
ahead.
could I just, jump in and respond to one thing that you did say, which I
Go,
think is
go.
important? Um, so before we get into the language programming, like I mentioned language violence, and I think that that's probably a term that I use that is it's like one of those things where I'm like, "Did I make that up? Did I hear that somewhere?" I'm not sure, and so I do know that I use it as a blanket term to describe moments, where people may use things that I think I've heard this before. It's like using something that should be a beautiful thing, like a club, right? Or something that may even be like for us should have been our birthright and kind of getting like clubbed down with it. And I think that it's not just that probably. I think there's a whole bunch of things like we probably need to sit down and define what it is. But I think that it is many of those things that you were mentioning, and we've all like when you hear it, you're kind of like, hey, have I experienced that? I think I've had moments like that.
Yeah,
And so I do know that there have been I think that I've I've seen a lot of language violence actually in the politics of our nations, and that's probably the most like that's the one that is the most important to address early on because if language gets tied up in a lot of political back and forth and the power struggle that naturally happens in politics, I think that's where we're really going to see there being like a languishing, of our languages, and it's really contributing to the death of your language to allow that to happen pretty much at all. It's a big part of the reason why we started doing our work through a nonprofit society instead of, and I think we get that question a lot actually. Like, why don't you work with a First Nation or like through a First Nation department? And the amount of politics and like kind of language violence that shows up because of the politics that end up happening is just too immense. And really, I think that. First Nations often are creating programs that are feel good for the people because that's who they're beholden to. And that's important too. That's a good thing. I think people need feel good programs, but a feel good program probably isn't where you're doing the most learning, right? Where
yeah,
you're doing the most learning is going to be in a program where you feel kind of uncomfortable because the learning tension is there, and you're going to be experiencing like you're going to be struggling a little bit, and that probably means you're learning. And so those are the programs that we're focused on, ones that are really effective and they're resulting in true language acquisition. We're not making sure that everyone comes in and goes out feeling good. So I think that one good example that I had heard one time was people had said about our program that it was like reverse residential school. And I was like, whoa, that's a big statement to make, and I really think of, I sit down and I think about things. I don't think that I'm dismissive. I'm curious. I go into those situations and I'm really like, where would that be coming from?
mm,
And around language violence, I really wanted to speak to something that's really important. So we started a Reclaiming My Language program, which is specifically focused. It's another example of a program that was quite new. We piloted that. We knew that we really didn't have the formula in our community to be able to implement a true silent speaker program is what it was originally called. And for those of you who don't know kind of the definition of what a silent speaker is or what a silent speaker program is directed towards, it's intended to support people who have were born into the language and learned their ancestors' language as their first language, and then it was taken from them in some way. So whether that was in residential school or they chose not to speak it for whatever reason because, or their parents decided to stop speaking it to them in order to keep them safe. But there was some sort of immense disruption that resulted in them not being able to produce the language after having been born into it and that being their first language. And so those individuals are particularly focused on because they are often, like, the true definition of a silent speaker is someone who is can often understand or has kind of like the language somewhere in like a back kind of like a back cabinet of their brain,
Mhm.
but they're not producing and it's not something that they may have engaged in for many, many, many years. And
Mhm.
so when they start engaging with the language again, their acquisition of it, their pronunciation, all aspects of the language are so fast for them to learn. I don't know what the equation is there, but I
Mhm.
do know that it's kind of like tapping into something that is already there for them.
Mhm.
So my grandpa was a silent speaker, and this is a really good example. He would sit around a table with people who were speaking Tlingit, and because he had suffered so much abuse around speaking the language in residential schools, he never spoke Tlingit again until the day he passed away.
Mhm.
But he could understand everything that everyone at the table was saying. And
Mhm.
so he's a really good example of a silent speaker.
Yeah.
Um, and so these programs were geared towards those individuals because we in this community didn't have anyone who had been born into the language who was still living. We didn't have people who were like true silent speakers who were
Yeah.
fitting into that category of being able to hear and understand, but maybe not speak. We're just needing that like kind of, I think, what was perceived as being like a bump to be able to become fluent speakers
Yes.
and then become that like kind of that library human again. Like they're a resource that is just like, you know, we can record with you, we can do all these things. And so that's kind of the theory behind the silent speaker programs, is really tapping into a resource that has been silent and not supported for many years.
Mhm.
And so what we did was we invited that program or applied for that program to come into our community, and we decided to pilot it anyways because we knew and we had experienced in our current programming, which is quite intensive, that our elders were essentially experiencing a trauma response when they were coming into the classrooms, sometimes even just by walking in the doors, never mind having the language spoken to them. And our programming is quite gentle, I think, comparatively to and the whole environment is intended and built around safety. And so their introduction of the language and the expectation that people would produce or they would produce correctly is very very slow and very sequential. It's like there is no correcting, we just accept everything that everyone says. You're celebrating, you know, like high fives, you're celebrated anytime you make a sound, and that is built into the methodology. But we were still witnessing individuals who were like on the far end of the spectrum of language trauma, having a trauma response just by
Mhm.
being in the proximity of where language was being taught. And we
Yeah.
had witnessed this a number of times, and there was like a certain amount, like everyone trauma responses in a different way. You know, it depends on the circumstance, a million things. But what we were witnessing, we knew we needed to do something different. So we invited this program into our community specifically to do some research and try to address what would that look like for us to be supporting these individuals who have more needs than maybe the average student or a younger student. When we ran that program, we really steeped ourselves in this understanding that there is a spectrum of language trauma, and we knew all these individuals were on it. We marketed the program for elders and specifically said, hey, if you want to take this program or you want to learn your language, you should come and attend this almost like pre-program first, and we'll just see how that goes. And there were many things built into the program, but in particular, we had therapeutic healing work that was happening in there. There was mindfulness practices. There was CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And then there was like just the minimal amount of language that we could possibly provide that we knew would bring up those feelings of trauma response around learning language. And so we just kind of like, mostly it was a healing program with a bit of language. And
Mm,
what we realized after going through this process, and this goes back to the idea of language violence, is that every single Indigenous person who does not have access to their language, which is your birthright, is on
mm,
that spectrum of
mm.
language trauma.
Yeah.
Even my unborn children are on that spectrum of language trauma. It's just a guarantee. We're all on there somewhere. And some people maybe have experienced more if you went to residential school and you received actual physical harm when you were speaking the language of your people and your birth language or the language of your ancestors. Um, and then there are those of us who intergenerationally did not have access to our languages. And when we were taught our languages, sometimes there was some of that. There may have been ineffective teaching methods, and people were angry at you when you didn't pronounce it correctly, things like that. And
Yeah.
so, what we realized in conjunction with that is that when people come into contact with something that should have been their birthright but was taken from them,
Mm.
those experiences that were so traumatizing, and all of us intergenerationally being somewhere on that spectrum of language trauma, coming back into contact with the language that should have been your birthright brings all of that up for people. And no matter who
100%.
you are, it's bringing it for you. And you are going to experience all that suffering. And there is a healing process that everyone goes through just by learning in whatever program you may be a part of.
Even at a
And
even
so,
at a level. Yeah. Go
mhm.
ahead. Sorry. Shouldn't have interrupted you. We've got a lag, so when I interrupt, it doesn't work very good.
No, no worries. Yeah, it's a little fuzzy. It sounds a little fuzzy. I'm
Yeah.
curious, but anyways.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think that was just a really important thing to acknowledge that was built into the understanding behind the building restorative systems pathway that we really wanted to create for people, was knowing that people came upon, like, if someone is saying, for example, about our program, that it's like reverse residential school, which I think is something that was hard for me to hear, because I think that we really have focused on trying to make this program as safe as possible for any individual who might be participating in the training that we even do with our teachers. It's built into everything that we do. We hold our own programming and our own team accountable to making sure that there is a high level of compassion in everything that we do. There's also accountability, which is where that comes together too. But we make sure that those things are hand in hand. And so it was hard for me to hear that, but I think that
Why?
when I
Why
hear
was
that,
why was that hard for you to hear?
because I think for like really obvious reasons, because residential
Oh,
school is a um, because residential school is a harsh was like is perceived as being like the most evil and most terrible thing that has ever happened in our communities, and it's like the main tool of the genocide that we experienced. And so for our program to be compared to that just
Hmm.
was a comparison, like, I don't know, that no one would ever want. I don't know, it seems obvious to me.
No, well, I didn't hear it that way at all. I heard it like
Mm.
when you said reverse residential school, what I heard was like, wow, how empowering that that you could go into a process and reverse all of that horror. I didn't
Oh,
attach
yeah.
the I
That's
didn't
not how it was intended, I assure you.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm missing some context. That's okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so they were very
yeah,
obviously,
it was
I would guess
intended.
they were very trauma triggered. I would guess they were very trauma triggered. Yeah.
Yeah. It was
That's
intended to compare us, like, when I go in there, basically, when I went to residential school, I was forced to speak English, and now when I go to your classroom, I'm forced to speak Tlingit. It feels the same as residential school.
Oh, isn't that sad, eh? That's a trauma
Yeah.
response. Aw.
Yeah,
That has nothing
and
to do with
so
that has nothing to do with your programming, but you know that. But yeah. Huh. Wow.
yeah, it was an
You had
elder who
invited
said
me to
that.
share you'd invited me to share my experience in your programming. I could do that
Yeah,
because I had
yeah,
completely
definitely.
would you like me to do that now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So when I first went, I was committed to going because for listeners, I'm an Anishinaabe. I'm not Tlingit by blood. And so I was committed to going for my husband, who is a residential school survivor and is someone who grew up going up Atlan Lake on camping trips with his family and has memories of falling asleep in the tents while all the people were talking Tlingit around the fire, of hearing the language in the home, of hearing his parents speak to each other in the language. Maybe not all the time, but he has a very when he talks about his memory of his language experience, it's kind of very warm and cozy and almost has shape. It's like a beautiful full moon, like it's so I love listening to him tell the stories over and over to me of what it was like as a child to fall asleep out at hunting camp listening to the people talk. It actually makes me very emotional. So I went to your classes to support him, because I love him. And I thought, well, I'll learn too, and then I'll be able to support him. But
Mhm,
what happened for me right away was that I was very confronted by some of the methodology. Um, but what saved me was that we started, I don't know if it's always a part of the class because I haven't gone through the teacher training yet, but we I don't know if we made a decision or if it just happened or what, but we started each day with checking in and ending each day with checking out. And so
mhm,
I'm all up for a check-in and a check-out. So that helped me process, what I was experiencing. And what I
mm,
was confronted with personally is the bullying I experienced as a child in school. Because in fact, it
mm,
is a classroom. It's a language classroom. So
mhm,
I'm in a classroom, and then, I have this old experience of being bullied as a child, like severely bullied, actually. And so, and shunned and not picked and, not being athletic enough. And, so I didn't compete. Um, and then some of those games, like the fly swatter game, like, I couldn't even hardly do it because then I had to
mm,
come then I got my trauma response started to happen. Like, I was angry, and I was like my mind was going like, "What am I doing here? This is a waste of my
mm,
time." Like, I've got so many other things to do. If my damn husband wants to speak his language, he can do it. Like, all this stuff is going on in my head,
mhm,
you know?
mhm,
But I think what helped was that the methodology of not correcting. Like, really, I
Mhm.
would say that I'm losing my voice. I would say that the teachers we had, the correcting that happened from the instructors wouldn't even account for 1%. Like, there was just no correcting. And
Mhm.
that quite quickly got me in a space of feeling okay. Then no one's gonna correct me if I play this word game competing and I'm perpetually losing, because I'm too slow or I'm not fast enough or whatever. I'm gonna be okay. So I haven't
Mhm.
really shared this part of it with you. Like, there was a lot of personal healing of my childhood educational trauma, the stuff
Mhm.
I experienced in public school. And
Mhm.
so that was really powerful. And then the joy of, like, because I'm an Anishinaabe, I didn't our language sounds very different than Tlingit, very, very different than Tlingit. And I'm not fluent by a long shot as a Anishinaabe Moin. I'm not fluent by a long shot, but I've grown up and I can get by. I can ask you if you're hungry or cold or where you're going or where you're from, and I can get by. Um, so I have the ability to make the sounds, and I take pride in that I make the sounds really good from Barons River. Like, every community has a dialect and an accent, eh? And you can tell where speakers are from, eh? So I feel proud that and fluent speakers have told me that, oh, you're really good, you're doing good. And so to go into your classes, COTS classes, and uh, hear all these guttural, like, throat, um, like, I didn't think I could make the sounds, like, literally, like, I was like, at the beginning, like, no sounds would even come out, you know, and then because there was no correcting, I would just keep trying and laughing, so much laughter, laughing at myself, you know, and
Mhm.
um, and also on a personal level, I faced my constant, it's not so bad now, I'm getting older, but the fear of being wrong, that you're going to be wrong, because there's
Yeah.
other games in the methodology where you're saying stuff, you have to, your partner shows you a picture and you can't even think of the right, so the teachers encourage you to just say anything, just baby talk, because
Mhm.
in the L1, we're treated like babies. Like, we're in the language one class, we're told, you're like a
Mhm.
baby. Don't worry about it. You're not gonna get it right. Like, just baby talk. And, like, my there was one person, I want to name him so bad, but he was so good at, like, the baby talking invitation. And he did it on purpose too. Like, he wasn't making up baby talk, but he was okay with baby talking. And then the joy
Mhm.
in the space, I'm re feeling it right now in this moment. Like, it
Mhm.
left me with body memory around language joy. That's
Mhm.
classes have done for me, is that I can recall those moments and I have joy in my body. And
Mhm.
and then as time passed, I didn't do enough homework, like, I barely passed because it is a class. You're graded and you ultimately have to pass. But because of the methodology and my willingness to participate, and
Mhm.
uh, the grading system, I was able to get enough to pass, which was really great.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if you
Mhm.
don't pass, like, people can come back and back and back. That's another thing that's so wonderful. So I don't
Mhm.
know. I loved it. And then in terms of what you talked about in terms of peacemaking processes, I had a powerful experience with, that we started out with the moose horns locked. I had a
Mhm.
powerful experience in your course where, somebody who had actually never made loving eye contact with me in 28, 29 years, made loving eye contact with me. And I was like so blown away, like so healed.
Mhm.
Like I can't even tell you. Like because we had been in the language space together, laughing and telling stories and just being babies. Yeah, playing.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like playing. It's playful. It's playful. And the
Yeah, it's
transference
beautiful.
naturally. So thanks for inviting me to share my experience.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
very cool to hear from that, it's always, like, one of my favorite things to hear people from, cohorts that came after ours and learned in the methodology and in from the textbooks because, um, it's such a testament to how well this methodology works, and how replicable it is, to have, which is built into the methodology and even how you teach it. You know, you want basically people to be able to move forward and
Yeah.
replicate that same teaching. And so, um, what I heard from you is that as someone who participated in the level one language class, which is the very first textbook, that your next goal is to teach it. And
Yeah.
that's something that's built into the methodology as well. And you're
Yeah.
attending actually our teacher training that's coming up. We
Yeah.
have an annual
Yeah.
teacher training
November.
that
Yeah.
happens every
Yeah.
fall-ish. And
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to be participating in
And
that. And actually,
I
I've been
feel
hearing
oh,
buzzing in the community about people wanting to. Someone asked me the other day, "Hey, has have these people reached out to you yet? Because they were talking about maybe running some classes." And I was like, "No, I haven't heard that." So but I thought of you.
right on. I would love to have language class in after Christmas there at home. I was gonna say I feel too like um and the time is already gone. We're almost up to our hour. It's so crazy.
Oh,
I know,
crazy.
right? But I wanted to say that like I really wish what I'm also experiencing as a result of being involved in the Tlingit language through COTS is that I wish this for my home community. I wish this
Mhm.
methodology for Barons River, but I can't do everything. I'm over here married to Brian, so I can't be over there
Yeah.
delivering language. Because in my community, there are so many fluent speakers. I mentioned that last time. I just mentioned one couple, and then I was talking to my sister about it, and she started naming. We started thinking about all the homes, like Jesse and Alfred Cochran. Like we just started naming all the homes, where there are couples who speak only in the language all day long to each other in front of their children. Like there are so
Mhm.
many homes like that in Barons, and yet there's a growing number of silent speakers. Like every single
Mm.
person in Barons River who isn't fluent is a silent
Mhm.
speaker the way you originally defined it there, where
Mhm.
they understand everything. And even the young kids, they say they don't understand. They do, you know?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was talking to a young person, and she said that. I said, "Let's see, go on." I said, "If your mom starts giving you heck in Soto, you know what she's saying." She said, "Yeah, I do." Yeah, I'm like trying to fake out that they don't know what their parents are saying.
Yeah, 'cause they're getting in
Yeah,
trouble.
yeah.
Funny.
So I'm gonna ask my web guy to we got to make sure we put in the link when I ever post this ever. I don't know, I have no resources, but for people to find the Paul Creek, whatever to do what you did, because I've heard you say before that all the community needs is a champion. Like you started this all by yourself. Now you have a team of language warriors, there's a team of
Mhm.
you, and there's going to
Mhm.
come a day when you won't even lead that team anymore. You'll be like the elder.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that moment is actually coming sooner than we realize because I've been training people for a couple months so I can go off and have babies and then start maybe a language nest.
There
That's
you
the
go. Oh my God.
that's the
Yeah, I want a language nest down Nakano. So we have 5 minutes left. I like to keep things on time because people are so busy and
Mhm,
it's a commitment to the
mhm.
time. Not out of disrespect to our own experience of time as Indigenous people, just that we can come and talk again. So what, and I have to talk about my earrings for sure. So, what, what are your closing thoughts today?
I think that my closing thoughts for today are just um, coming back to always coming back to um, gratitude for how far we've come and an understanding that this is the long game. It will take lifetimes uh, to really reverse that shift that has happened in the disruption and the disruption that has happened in our languages and in our traditional ways of being. And in the moments where you may be feeling a little discouraged, which happens sometimes, to just remember that we're a forest, you're not a tree standing alone. And I think that that's really, really important that there's someone who's just like you in every community doing this thing. And so, yeah, just an affirmation of how far we've come in the time we've been doing this, which for me has been 10 years, and
Mm,
how far there still is yet to go. And I guess, so then choosing presence, just being present with where you are now and having gratitude. And
mm,
it's seems so, easy to say it, but the reality of that really is moment to moment for me every
mm,
day. And it's something I'm reminding myself of a lot right now.
mm. Beautiful. So my closing thing is that I also do training through Landmark Worldwide, and right now I'm in the leadership training program,
Mm,
and it's really helping. It's going to help me. Like resisting. It's going to help me improve my improve being disciplined, especially when I don't want to do something. So,
mm,
discipline only counts when you don't want to do what you're doing. It doesn't count when you do what you like over and over again. That's not discipline. And so,
right.
sorry about that, everyone. Discipline counts most when, we do the things for which we are responsible and we learn to do them
Mhm,
with joy and passion and not resentment. So
mhm.
Um, I mentioned that because I'm going into the uh, teacher training program, COTS teacher training program in November, and I'm committing publicly here to doing the damn homework
That's funny.
because without doing any of the homework, my retention, my ability to retain was pretty good. Like on those quizzes at the beginning of every class, I consistently got 56, like I got 5 or 6 right, just from memory from the first class, from the class before. And
Oh my
so,
God.
well, I'm smart and
Mm,
I'm present in the class. And so I
mm.
was this is my life mantra. I wonder what would happen if I actually did the work. Like the way it was
That's
designed, eh? So I'm
really
committed
funny.
to doing the work the way it's designed. And I'm in the leadership training
Mm,
program which is going to help me do that because wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. And so I'm
mm.
excited about doing the program. I'm really, really excited. And I got 1 minute. Okay, these earrings, the Brave Indigenous Conversations podcast is all about fun and truth and uncomfortable and comfortable. And these earrings are the beadwork, the artwork, really, of Jerry Pangman. Geripangman. And you can find her on Facebook, and she's a phenomenal beater. And I think they call these something dusters because you're supposed to wear them with a top like this and they dust your collarbone, eh? So I love
Wow.
earrings. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we're done. I hope to have you back again soon. Love you.